Hi, I'm Ronan. The last time my family sat around a table, they toasted to my failure, smiled while signing away what was mine. They thought I was too broken to fight back, too silent to matter. So I gave them everything, every cent of the 13 million inheritance my grandfather left me. And as they laughed behind my back, the judge stood up, looked them in the eye, and applauded. Now ask yourself, what could make a judge applaud the man who gave it all away? The courthouse smelled of polished oak and paper older than memory. The air outside was crisp, the kind that made you breathe deeper just to feel something steady. I held the envelope in my hand like it weighed more than the $13 million it represented. Maybe it did. Maybe it held every quiet year I'd spent proving I wasn't the fool they thought I was. The hearing room was already full when I walked in. Relatives lined the benches, leaning toward one another, whispering behind manicured hands. The Vale family, proud, polite, poisonous. Silas sat near the front, shoulders square in his tailored suit, smirk already in place. He'd always been the one to take up too much space, even when we were kids. My mother, Evelyn, sat beside him. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her fingers fidgeted with her pearl necklace, that nervous rhythm she thought no one noticed. My father cleared his throat once, loud enough to claim the air, but said nothing. Judge Mendez entered, a tall man with steady eyes. "We'll proceed," he said, settling in. As I took my seat, I glanced at the small pen clipped inside my jacket, silver, engraved with 2 words, "Honor First," my grandfather's gift. He'd been the kind of man who built with his hands and never signed a deal he couldn't keep. His voice still lived somewhere in me. When they forget what honor means, you'll remember for them. The clerk called my name, and I rose. Ronan Vale, representing himself. Silas snorted. "Of course you are." Laughter rippled through the back rows. My aunts and uncles, the same ones who used to pat my head and say, "You've got such a good heart," like it was another word for useless. I placed the envelope on the table. The sound of paper sliding against wood was louder than any insult. Judge Mendez looked up. "Mr. Vale, I understand you're here to make a transfer of assets." "Yes, Your Honor," I said evenly. "This document transfers my entire inheritance to my parents." The room stirred. Murmurs. Someone whispered, "He's giving it all away?" Silas laughed outright. Guess the family idiot finally learned his place. I didn't answer. I signed the page with the Honor First pen, slow and deliberate, the way my grandfather had signed every blueprint he ever drew. My hand didn't shake. Judge Mendez leaned forward. "Mr. Vale, this estate is valued at over $13 million. Are you sure you wish to relinquish your rights?" I met his eyes. "I'm sure, Your Honor. I'm simply giving back what's already been taken from me, just not in dollars." The whispers turned to chuckles. My cousin Lucas muttered, "He's finally snapped." My mother's breath caught, barely audible, but I heard it. I always heard her when she was afraid. She looked at me then, her eyes glossy. "Ronan, sweetheart, you don't have to—" "I know, Mom." I smiled faintly. "I do." The judge watched me longer than anyone else. He wasn't laughing. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he saw the pattern under the chaos. He didn't sign right away. He just sat there, pen hovering above the paper. Silas couldn't help himself. "You're making a scene for sympathy. Always the same. Too soft to fight, too proud to quit." My voice was calm. Maybe I just learned which fights matter. For the first time, Silas faltered. A shadow crossed his face, confusion or irritation, maybe both. The judge set his pen down. "Mr. Vale," he said quietly, "do you understand what this means for your family?" I looked straight at him. I do, Your Honor. That's why I'm doing it. He nodded slowly, tapping the pen against the table before setting it aside. Then perhaps they don't understand what it means for them. The words hung in the room, sharp and still. My relatives shifted uncomfortably. Even Silas stopped smirking. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and gathered my pen. The reflection of the courtroom lights shimmered along its silver edge. For just a moment, I saw my grandfather's face in that reflection. Steady, proud, unyielding. And I remembered the last time someone had called me a disappointment. It wasn't a stranger, or a teacher, or even an angry boss. It was Silas. And it wasn't said out of frustration. It was delivered with the casual certainty of someone convinced that the hierarchy of the world was fixed, and I was somewhere below the floorboards. It was 2 nights before the hearing. The Vale estate sat like a monument to self-importance, pillars, sprawling lawns, and portraits on every wall that made you feel like the eyes were always watching. The annual Founders' Dinner was our family's most theatrical performance, meant to honor our grandfather, the man who built everything from nothing. It had long since become Silas's stage to remind everyone who was now in charge. I arrived late, not intentionally. I'd been caught up in a zoning call that ran long. When I walked into the dining room, the air was already thick with wine and entitlement. My place card was waiting, neatly tucked between an unused coat closet and the swinging service door, right next to where the waitstaff disappeared with empty plates. Not one head turned when I entered, not even my mother's. I took my seat quietly, trying not to make eye contact with the server who gave me a sympathetic glance. He was younger, probably someone's nephew picking up weekend shifts. He didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this circus. Silas stood at the head of the long oak table, glass raised. "To the true heirs of the Vale name," he said, voice full of charm that barely hid the poison underneath. "Those who carry on our legacy with strength, vision, and results." There was a light clinking of glasses and a murmur of approval. I didn't raise mine. He hadn't said my name, but he didn't have to. The absence was the point. He caught my eye and gave a small shrug, like this was all just family fun. I turned my gaze to the portraits lining the room. My grandfather's eyes stared out from oil and canvas, firm and unsmiling. I remembered sketching the new wing of this very house when I was 27, barely out of grad school. I'd worked nights and weekends, balanced clients and deadlines, redesigned that entire southern corridor, only for Silas to unveil it the following year as his vision for the family estate. Not once did he mention my name. Now he used that same corridor to lead donors and business partners through his grandfather's house. Halfway through the second course, I heard him lean in toward our mother. "He's still trying to live off Grandpa's ghost," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. A few cousins chuckled. One of them snorted so loudly it drew glances. I picked up my glass of water, not to drink, but to avoid speaking. The rim trembled slightly against my lip. I stared at my reflection in the water. Tired eyes, pressed suit. The kind of man who learned early that speaking up only made the silence around him louder. No one asked me a single question all evening. No one mentioned the hearing coming up. It was as if I was already written out of the will. And maybe, in their eyes, I had been long ago. Later, while the others lingered over dessert and bourbon, I slipped out to the hallway. The air felt cooler there, less perfumed. I stood by the window, watching the wind stir the Spanish moss outside. Footsteps behind me, soft ones. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Ronan, my mother whispered, touching my arm lightly. Please don't make a scene tomorrow. I said nothing. It's not worth it, she continued. Just let them have it this time. It's easier that way. I turned to her. She looked tired, older than she had a year ago. Or maybe I'd just finally noticed. Her pearls glinted under the hallway light. That's what you said at every dinner, Mom. She opened her mouth to speak again, but closed it just as quickly. I walked away before she could say more. Out on the porch, the night had turned cooler. Crickets chirped in the distance. I looked back at the house, every window lit up with warmth and conversation. Every one, except the small one at the far end. Mine. I stood there a while longer, listening to the echoes of laughter that didn't include me. It was strange how a place could feel less like home the longer you stayed. If silence is what they want, I murmured, I'll give them the kind they'll never forget. The words had barely left my mouth when the morning wind cut through my coat, nudging me back into motion. I turned from the porch, stepped down onto the gravel drive, and made my way toward the car. My hand reached instinctively into my jacket pocket, brushing against the cold edge of my phone. One new notification blinked on the screen. Voice message, Harold Finch. Finch had been our family's lawyer for over 30 years, loyal, discreet, and sharp as a tack even in his 70s. He never called without a reason. I unlocked the phone and hit play. Good morning, Ronan, his voice crackled through the tiny speaker. Per Victor's instructions, I'm sending you this audio file. He made me promise it would only reach you if you chose to attend the inheritance hearing. It's titled, For Ronan's Eyes Only. Take your time with it. There was a pause. Then a second voice took over. Older, raspier, but unmistakably my grandfather's. Ronan, if you're hearing this, it means you're still trying to understand what honor really costs. I stood still beside my car, phone to my ear. Traffic hummed somewhere in the distance, but the sound faded beneath his voice. A voice I hadn't heard in 3 years, yet one that lived in every quiet room I ever worked in. I didn't leave you the inheritance as a gift, he continued. It was never about the money. You know that. It was a test, a lens to show who sees value and who only sees wealth. I drove in silence back to my apartment. The message still playing, I listened as the city blurred past the windshield. The others, they talk about legacy like it's a bank account. But legacy is built in silence, in sacrifice, in the moments no one applauds. You already live that. That's why I trusted you. The elevator groaned as I stepped into the hallway of my building, my hand still clutching the phone like it was something sacred. I entered my apartment. The clean lines, shelves of books and blueprints, quiet corners lit by early morning sun. This was the world I built. No plaques, no family crests, just proof that I could stand alone. I sat down on the worn leather chair by the window and placed the phone on the table, letting his voice fill the room. If you decide to act, there's a final clause, a sealed envelope in Finch's safe. It names everything Silas has hidden, every deal he made behind the family's back. But don't use it unless you're certain they've shown you who they really are. I looked over at the bookshelf, to the small wooden box tucked behind a model of the Vale estate. VF was etched on the lid in neat block letters. I reached for it. Inside was a collection of old drafting pens, faded receipts, a watch that hadn't worked in years. and the silver pen engraved with honor first. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. A gust of wind stirred the curtains. Outside, the branches of the elm tree beside my window shifted, and then, as if timed, a single golden leaf detached, fluttering slowly to the pavement below. When the last leaf falls, I heard his voice in my memory, "You'll know your moment." I closed the box and took a deep breath, my hand curled around the pen. Not as a keepsake this time, but as a tool. "All right, Grandpa," I whispered. "Let's finish what you started." I stood, picked up my phone, and dialed Finch. "Harold, it's Ronan. Go ahead and prepare the transfer papers for the hearing." There was a pause on the other end. Then, and the final clause. "Leave it sealed," I said, "until I say otherwise." I hung up and stood by the window, watching the light shift across the floorboards. The city moved quietly below me, unaware of what was coming. "You gave me the map," I murmured. "Now it's time they see where it leads." By the time I stepped out of my building and into the gold-tinged Charleston afternoon, the wheels were already in motion. I didn't rush. The walk to the Vale & Sons headquarters was only 10 minutes, but I took my time, letting the rhythm of my footsteps steady the thoughts in my head. I passed the rows of clipped hedges and polished storefronts, the glass tower that bore our name gleaming above the skyline like a trophy we'd stolen. Inside, the lobby smelled like citrus and money. The receptionist gave me a tight, obligatory smile and waved me through. No one greeted me. That was normal. When I entered the boardroom on the 22nd floor, they were already there. The usual suspects seated around the long mahogany table like kings at court. Silas sat at the head, of course, Evelyn next to him, posture tense, hands folded too neatly. Marcus across from her, unreadable behind thick glasses, always present yet never truly there. I took my seat without being acknowledged, though this time it wasn't at the far end like it used to be. No name card was waiting for me. I didn't need one. Silas was mid-sentence, something about quarterly growth and overseas expansion, when the glass door opened and his assistant, Jenna, stepped in holding a sealed envelope. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "This was marked urgent." He gave her that clipped smile he reserved for the help and snatched the envelope without a word. His eyes scanned the front. "Legal revision notice. Subject, inheritance hearing review," he read aloud, then frowned. The room went still. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the scratch of his letter opener as he slit the envelope. As he unfolded the document, I watched the arrogance drain from his face in slow increments, eyes narrowing, lips tightening, jaw ticking. "What the hell is this?" He looked up, his gaze locking on mine. "You filed a review?" I kept my tone even. "Just asking for clarity. Full transparency." His voice sharpened. "Transparency? What are you insinuating?" Evelyn's hand fluttered to her chest. "Ronan, this isn't necessary, is it?" Marcus shifted in his chair but said nothing. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. Silas snapped. "This is a pathetic attempt to stir drama. You don't understand the implications of what you've done." I met his stare without blinking. "I understand more than you think, especially about how Grandpa structured his estate. I think the court will be interested too." Silas laughed, short and humorless. "You've never had the stomach for the real business of this family." "No," I said, "but I know how to read fine print, and I know what honor's supposed to mean around here, even if most of you forgot." That landed harder than I expected. His smirk cracked. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling glasses and drawing a quiet gasp from our mother. "You don't get to question my loyalty to this family," he hissed. "You haven't earned that right." I didn't move. "I don't need your permission to seek the truth." Jenna had frozen by the door, unsure if she should leave or stay. Finch, seated silently near the end of the table, cleared his throat just slightly, the kind of sound meant to signal confirmation without drawing fire. Evelyn whispered, "Please, boys, not like this, not in this room." But Silas ignored her, still burning holes into me. "You want to fight, Ronan? Is that it?" I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with a calm scrape. "I don't want to fight. I want accountability." He sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No," I said, "just the one who finally stopped pretending." There was a pause, not long, but deep. Marcus shifted again, but didn't speak. I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Not approval, not support, but doubt. That was new. The meeting adjourned moments later in awkward silence. Silas muttered something to Marcus as I passed behind them. He's bluffing. He's always bluffing. But Marcus didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I was the last one out. My shoes clicked steadily against the polished marble floor, the walls of glass reflecting the shape of a man they used to ignore, now too visible to dismiss. As I stepped into the elevator, I heard Silas's voice behind me, low and sharp. "You just declared war, little brother." I didn't turn around. My hand hovered over the close button. "No," I said. "I just accepted the one you started years ago." By the time the elevator reached the lobby, my face was calm again. But inside, I could feel something shifting. Not rage, not fear, just a kind of weightless resolve, like standing in the eye of a storm you've stopped trying to escape. The rain had started sometime after sunset, tapping against the windows like a restless thought. I walked home through it, soaked to the bone by the time I stepped into my apartment, but I didn't bother changing. I dropped my coat on the chair, turned on the old jazz record player in the corner, and let the low hum of Coltrane fill the room. The city was still awake, its glow stretching through the curtains, but in here, time felt suspended. I sat at my desk, the same one where I had sketched hundreds of blueprints, structures for other people's legacies, not mine. I opened my laptop, mostly out of habit. That's when I saw the email. From Anonymous. Sender a Proton Mail subject. Thought you should know. Attached. A PDF labeled R. Vale Audit Concern 2016. I hesitated, heart already pounding before I clicked. The document looked official. A fabricated audit report implying I had misused funds from one of my grandfather's trusts. It was detailed, professional looking, and completely false. Silas didn't waste time. My hand clenched on the mouse. This was it. His first move. I could already hear how the whispers would start. How convenient, they'd say. How Ronan, the quiet one, suddenly had issues with accountability. How he'd never been good with responsibility. And just like that, they'd reframe the story. Again. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. I almost didn't answer. But then I heard her voice. "Ronan, it's me." I opened the door to find my mother standing there, umbrella dripping, a takeout bag in one hand. Her coat was too thin for this kind of storm. "I thought you might not have eaten," she said softly, like this was just any other evening. I let her in without a word. She placed the food on the counter, lemon chicken, still warm. Something I used to love when I was younger. She poured us both water and sat across from me. "I've been hearing things," she began, folding her hands. "People are talking." I gave a small, bitter laugh. "Of course they are." She looked up. "Why are you doing this, Ronan? Why now?" I studied her face, the way her eyes darted instead of holding mine, how her smile was brittle around the edges. "You've gone too far," she whispered. "Why dig this up? Can't we just let it be?" "Let it be," I echoed. "Like we let it be when Silas claimed my work as his? Like we let it be every time I was told to stay quiet for the sake of the family name? That's not fair." "No," I said flatly. "What's not fair is pretending I was ever part of this family the same way he was." She blinked, stunned by the cold in my voice. I softened just slightly. "I'm tired, Mom, of being the one who absorbs the silence, the shame, the smirks. I'm tired of being told that peace is more important than truth." Her hands fidgeted with a napkin. "He's your brother." "No," I said, voice quieter now. "He's your son. I'm just the one you never defended." The words hung between us like smoke. "I tried to protect you," she said. "No, you tried to protect peace." I stood, walking to the window. Rain slid down the glass like veins. Behind me, her voice cracked. "So, what now? You destroy him? Your own family?" I didn't answer. She didn't stay long after that. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence returned. Heavier this time. I stared at my phone for a long time. The thought came uninvited. Withdraw the petition, call the court, let this go before it swallows you whole. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then a ping. Another message, this time a voice memo from Jenna, Vale Holdings' assistant. "Mr. Vale, I think you should see what your brother's been doing with your grandfather's trust. I'm sending you everything. Be careful." Attached were real documents, not rumors, not fakes, bank transfers, shell companies, signatures. Silas had drained money from Victor Vale's trust into offshore accounts masked by corporate fronts. He hadn't just betrayed the family name. He'd gutted it for sport. I sat back, heart thudding, as the jazz record scratched to a close. "So this is what Grandpa meant," I whispered. "Not about wealth, but about rot." I opened the old wooden case on my desk. Inside was the Honor First pen. Still inked, still smooth. I grabbed a blank sheet, flipped it over, and wrote just one line on the back. "When you lie to everyone long enough, you forget who's still watching." I folded the paper slowly and slid it into an envelope. My fingers didn't shake this time. Outside, the rain kept falling. I stood by the window, watching the lights of Charleston blur through the glass. A small, exhausted smile touched my lips. "Tomorrow," I said, "I stop being their ghost." The morning came fast and loud. Rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the storm hadn't. It had only moved inside. By the time I reached the Vale estate, a wall of reporters had already formed outside the gates, their voices muffled by the thick glass of my car. Flashes lit up like strobe lights, every one of them hungry for a quote, a crack, a confirmation of the scandal they all smelled bleeding through the oak walls. Security was doubled. Men I didn't recognize stood at the iron fence, earpieces buzzing, eyes twitching toward every shadow. The same mansion where we once toasted our family name now looked like a crime scene with better lighting. I stepped out of the car slowly, suit pressed, hair dry, no tie. This wasn't about formality. It was about presence. Today, I wasn't a whisper at the end of the table. I was the one bringing the noise. Inside, the air was sharp with cologne and panic. I walked into the great room, The same long oak table where Silas once toasted the real heirs. That memory buzzed at the edge of my mind like a splinter that never quite healed. Today, though, no one laughed, no wine was poured, no silver gleamed. Everyone was already seated, Evelyn wringing her hands beside Marcus, Silas pacing with a paper clenched in his fist, Finch quiet in the corner, one leg crossed neatly over the other. The moment Silas saw me, he snapped. "You think this is a game?" he barked, waving the Charleston Gazette in the air. "You leaked this garbage?" The headline read, "Vale family under investigation for trust misuse. Sources point to internal rift." I sat down slowly, met his eyes. "No," I said. "You did. I just stopped covering for you." He slammed the newspaper on the table. "You've destroyed our name, Grandpa's legacy, this company, your own family. For what? Revenge?" I didn't blink. "Truth. Don't play righteous, Ronan. You leaked fabricated trash, fake numbers, anonymous tips." I reached into my coat pocket and placed an envelope in front of him. He froze. "What's that?" "Go ahead," I said. "You love reading things out loud." He tore it open, eyes scanning quickly, then slower, then still. Inside were printed transactions, bank records, internal memos, a paper trail linking shell corporations to funds directly siphoned from the Vale Trust, all signed off by someone with his initials. Silas's face went pale beneath the spray-tan glow of confidence he wore so easily. Evelyn leaned forward, voice shaking. "Silas, is that true?" He didn't answer. Marcus shifted in his seat. For once, he looked at something other than the floor. "I asked you once, years ago, what happened to those withdrawals. You said it was for expansion." Silas's jaw clenched. "It was. It is. Business is complex. You wouldn't understand." "No," I said softly. "You just never thought anyone would look past the surface." Evelyn was already crying, quietly, like she had done it before, alone in her room, in silence. The sound made my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. Silas turned to her. "Don't you dare look at me like that. You knew this family was built on bending rules." Her head shook slightly. "Not like this." Finch cleared his throat, finally speaking. "The documents are admissible, and the court will verify all of it. There's no escaping this." Silas shot to his feet. "You think this wins you something, Ronan? The house? The company? The applause?" I stood up, reached into my pocket again, pulled out the Honor First pen, the same one my grandfather gave me the summer I turned 15, after I fixed the broken porch step with duct tape and hope. I laid it gently on the table in front of him. "He left this for the one who remembered what it meant," I said. "Guess that's me now." I turned and walked toward the grand doors without waiting for a response. Evelyn called my name once, but I didn't look back. Outside, the storm had left behind a hard wind and scattered leaves across the drive. The press surged forward, cameras up, questions firing. One voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Vale, are you stepping away from the inheritance because of guilt?" I stopped, turned slightly toward the lens. "No," I said, voice steady. "Because I'm done being part of a lie." The flashes popped like lightning. The wind picked up. And somewhere behind me, I swear I heard the long oak door close. Softer than I expected, but final. The sound of that door closing followed me all the way home. By the time I reached my apartment, dusk had already softened the city's edges. Rain tapped at the windows, steady, almost kind, like the storm outside had settled down just long enough for the one inside me to take its place. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The room glowed dimly with reflections from the wet streets below. A jazz record I hadn't remembered playing spun quietly in the corner. Miles Davis. Always did sound better in the dark. I stood by the desk, staring at the half-finished glass of whiskey beside the Honor First pen. Neither touched, both waiting. The TV was still on from earlier, some local news channel. And there he was, Silas, perfect suit, media smile. I turned up the volume just as the reporter asked him about the allegations. "My brother's always been emotional," Silas said, flashing that signature grin like he was posing for a portrait. "He's acting out. There's no evidence, just resentment. It's sad, really." I didn't say anything, just let the silence swell between the words. I knew that tone. He was cornered and trying to charm his way out. That trick used to work on the board, on the press, on our parents, but not on me, not anymore. The screen flickered. I muted it. A soft vibration broke the moment. My phone buzzed once, then went still. One new voicemail. Evelyn Vale. I hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice cracked softly through the speaker. No rehearsed lines this time. I should have spoken sooner. "I'm sorry, Ronan. I see now what you were trying to protect. I hope you still see me as your mother." That was all. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone in my palm like it might say more if I waited. But it didn't. Just the hum of the rain, the faint hiss of the record, and that voice looping in my head. She meant it, and I couldn't answer. Not yet. There was a knock at the door. Quiet, deliberate. Finch. He stepped in, rain dripping off the collar of his overcoat. He didn't speak at first, just set his briefcase on the table and opened it carefully. Legal pads, sealed documents. The kind of order I used to resent, but now found oddly grounding. He looked at me, not as a client, but like a teacher eyeing a student before the final exam. "You know," he said, "they'll laugh first." I tilted my head. "They always do." He nodded. "That's what people do when they don't understand dignity." I leaned back in the chair. "Let them laugh. I'm not here for their applause." Finch handed me one last folder, thicker than the rest. The sealed clause. If you decide to open it in court, you'd better be ready. "I've been ready," I said, though even I wasn't sure if it was true. He packed up slowly, then paused by the door. "This changes things. Not just for them. For you too." "I know." And then he left, just like he always did, quiet, efficient, leaving space behind like he never filled it. I sat there alone, letting the hours slip by. At some point, the rain picked up again, gentle, persistent, like fingers drumming a rhythm I couldn't quite place. I stepped onto the balcony. The city glowed beneath the clouds, smeared in orange and white. Wind curled around my collar. I looked toward the oak tree across the street, the same one I'd watched every fall for the past 5 years. And there it was, the last leaf. It trembled once, twice, then let go, spinning downward in slow circles, graceful and stubborn, like it wanted to hold on just a second longer. I closed my eyes. When the last leaf falls, you'll know your moment. His voice, clear as ever. "It's time," I whispered. Back inside, I gathered everything. Evidence folder, court documents, the pen, and the sealed clause. I hadn't touched it since the day Finch gave it to me. Part of me didn't want to know what it said. Maybe because knowing made it real, made the responsibility mine. I tucked it into the folder without opening it. The paper crinkled like an exhale. I set the alarm for dawn, and just before I closed my eyes, I whispered into the dark, They took everything I had. But tomorrow, they'll see what they could never buy. He woke up before the alarm, not because of nerves, those had burned off somewhere in the middle of the night, but because it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. The courthouse loomed as I stepped from the cab, its old bricks streaked darker by the night's rain. Crowds were already gathering, some with microphones, others with coffee cups and wide eyes, hungry for spectacle. I didn't flinch. Let them look. Let them guess. Inside, it smelled of polish and tension. The courtroom felt smaller now, though nothing had changed since the first time I stood here. Same cracked tiles, same dull buzz of fluorescent lights. But today, the room was full. Rows packed with press, onlookers, and more than a few people who once shook my hand but never really saw me. Silas was already seated when I walked in, jaw tight, tie perfect, a practiced smile on his face. The kind of smile that said, "I've already won." His legal team sat beside him, crisp suits and sharp glances. I didn't look at any of them. I just walked straight to my seat beside Finch, nodding once. Evelyn sat behind us, hands folded tightly around a handkerchief. Marcus was next to her, face carved in stone, but his eyes were tired. Judge Mendez entered like a blade, lean, steady, cutting through the noise with a look. The murmurs stopped. This hearing is now in session. Silas's attorney rose first. Smooth voice, smooth words. He painted me as impulsive, emotionally volatile, grieving a legacy that was never truly his. Said I was trying to dismantle my own family's name out of jealousy and grief. He is attempting to weaponize sentiment, the lawyer said, gesturing toward me like I was a broken ornament. There is no credible evidence, only regret. I didn't move. Finch remained seated, silent. Then the judge turned to us. "Mr. Vale, do you have a response?" I stood slowly, my voice low but steady. "I have nothing to defend. I didn't come here to win anything. I came to return what was never mine, and to reveal what was never theirs." A ripple went through the room. Silas chuckled under his breath, whispering something to his lawyer. Probably pathetic. Then Finch reached into his case. The sealed envelope, the one I'd carried all night, unread, was passed to the judge without a word. It rested in the judge's hands for a long second before he opened it. I watched his eyes scan the document. One line, then two. Then his expression shifted. Not dramatically, not the gasp people might imagine, but like a man realizing the world had just tilted half an inch. "Mr. Silas Vale," he said, voice even, "are you aware that your grandfather's final addendum specifies that the entirety of the Vale estate shall be transferred to the State Historical Fund if any heir is found to have committed financial fraud regarding family trusts?" Silas blinked. That's not... The judge cut him off. "Based on the verified records submitted into evidence by your brother, that condition has been met." Someone in the back gasped, the kind that echoes. Silas stood, frantic. "This is absurd. Those records could have been forged." "They've been authenticated," Finch said, calm as ever, "by a third-party auditor. Your own shell companies left quite a trail." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was sharp, humming like tension on a wire. Silas opened his mouth again, but no words came. I looked at him, not with vengeance, just clarity. "You taught me how to disappear, Silas," I said, voice low. "Today, you vanish for real." Everything broke at once. Journalists stood, cameras flashing. Silas's lawyer demanded recess. Evelyn wept softly, her shoulders shaking behind me. Marcus, he just sat there, Didn't say a word, but he didn't defend Silas either. That silence was the loudest sound in the room. The judge raised his hand, calling for order. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the bench, then slowly removed them. "I've sat in this chair for nearly 30 years, he said, and I've seen every flavor of greed, betrayal, and pride. But rarely do I see someone walk in with nothing to gain and everything to lose, and still choose the truth." He turned to me. "Mr. Vale, people don't usually come here to give something up and still win. But today, you did both." And then, silence. And then, applause. It wasn't everyone, just a handful, but it spread, hesitantly at first, then rising like the rain outside was clapping through the glass. The gavel struck once. "This court is adjourned." I didn't linger, didn't wait to shake hands, just gathered the file, stood, and walked past the bench. The honor first pen still lay on the table, untouched. I left it there. It had already done its job. The hallway buzzed with press, microphones flying in every direction. "Mr. Vale, is it true you just gave up a $13 million inheritance? Do you regret bringing this public?" I didn't stop, until one voice cut through. "Are you giving it up because of guilt?" I turned then, faced the camera straight on. "No," I said, "because I'm done being part of a lie." Behind me, the courtroom doors creaked shut. Evelyn caught up as the crowd thinned, gently touching my arm. Her hand trembled. "He'll hate you forever," she whispered, barely audible. I looked at her, not unkind. "Then, at least he'll finally see me." The wind was quiet when I stepped through the old cemetery gate. Not silent, not exactly, but soft in a way that made every leaf rustle like a memory. The sky was giving in to dusk, streaked in orange and lavender, casting long shadows across the worn headstones. I knew exactly where to go. I could have walked there with my eyes closed. It had been 2 days since the hearing, 2 days since I'd walked away with nothing in my hands, and more peace than I'd ever known. The grass near my grandfather's grave was damp, scattered with the last of the autumn leaves. I knelt slowly, the familiar ache in my knees grounding me, reminding me I was still here, still standing, even if I'd lost more than most would ever guess. I pulled the honor first pen from my coat pocket. It was lighter than I remembered. Maybe it had always been that way. Or maybe something inside me had finally stopped weighing it down. I set it gently on the headstone, right above the carved words that had faded just enough over time to make you lean closer, like he was still whispering something you had to earn the right to hear. "I didn't win money," I said, my voice low. "Didn't lose it either. I just showed them what it costs to forget who they are." The pen glinted in the fading light. The same pen I used to sign away 13 million, the same one that ended a legacy of denial. Somewhere behind me, leaves crunched. I didn't turn. Not right away. Then I heard her voice. Tired, soft, not unsure. Just human. "You were right." I stood slowly and faced her. Evelyn looked older than the last time I'd seen her. Not because of the passing days, but because the truth had a way of stripping people bare. Her hands were empty. No casserole dish, no olive branch dressed as advice. Just her. And the kind of honesty I thought she'd forgotten how to carry. "I raised 2 sons," she said, eyes steady on mine, "but only one man." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I shook my head, not out of disagreement, more like understanding. "You raised both," I said. "One just learned too late what honor means." Her lip trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. Not this time. I think she'd already shed every tear she had over the past week. We both had. She reached out, hesitating just a second before resting her hand on my shoulder. It was such a simple thing, a gesture I'd stopped expecting from her long ago. But in that moment, it felt heavier than gold. When she stepped back, she looked toward the grave. He would have been proud, you know. I glanced down at the headstone, the corners of my mouth lifting just a little. He already was. She nodded once, then turned and walked away without saying goodbye. I didn't stop her. Sometimes parting without words is the most honest thing people can offer each other. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon. The breeze picked up just enough to scatter the leaves in small circles around my feet. One leaf, dry and golden, the shape of memory itself, drifted down from the oak above and landed beside me. I picked it up, held it for a while, then slipped it between the pages of my grandfather's old journal, the one I'd carried since this all began. The same one with pages filled with half-truths, observations, and reminders of a man who never said much but meant everything when he did. I stood, brushing the dirt from my pants. My knees cracked again, but I didn't wince. Somewhere in the distance, I saw Finch watching from beneath the old gate arch. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just gave a small nod before disappearing back into the orange-tinted evening. I turned toward the gravel path and started walking. Didn't look back. Some things deserve a clean end. And as I moved through the soft hush of the cemetery, I found myself speaking. Not aloud, not really. Just a whisper between my ribs and the world. Silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before the truth finally speaks. And when it does, even the ones who laughed, listen. The breeze carried the last of the leaves behind me, and for the first time in years, I walked with nothing on my shoulders.